Welcome to Beyond Belief, Tales of Religious Exodus, where we delve into the personal journeys of people who've left fundamentalist religions. In this series, we explore their experiences within religion, their journey out, and how they found meaning and healing on the other side.
Okay, Chantal, welcome to Beyond Belief. And your story is very interesting because you went through a bunch of stuff with the church, and there's my understanding that you kind of reshuffled a lot of your relationship with the church in a way that just sort of like works for you, and you can obviously correct me or update that language. And then you've written a book about your experiences with advice for others. And so I would love to start out by hearing more about your personal journey, your upbringing, and then we can shift to hearing more about what it is that you are teaching other people and what you would like other people to know.
Awesome. That's a lot. So I'll start talking and then allow for you to shape the conversation. But first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's such a sacred journey when people are taking sovereignty of their faith and making decisions rather than being passive. And I know that that's kind of the vibe of the folks on here that are exiting and taking sovereignty of like their relationship with the divine. So it's an honor to be one of many on this podcast. I'm from North Carolina and grew up in the woods with a family that I was born and raised in the Episcopal Church, but we were also expansive Christians from the start. Like my mom taught me how to meditate. I did Reiki training at the age of 12. I had godparents that were just mystic and incredibly wise individuals. So I will say that from the beginning, I very much experienced the best I could from a church that I loved so much and that was home to me. And I experienced God outside of that box. So that is kind of my upbringing. I went to college, graduated college at the age of 21, was sitting in my home church and got what I would call a black and white call, just a very clear voice about like, you're meant to be a priest. And I thought I was going to be a world religions professor. I had read the Quran and Buddhist scriptures and had spent meaningful time in Hare Krishna temples. Like I was so in love with world religions, and I was pretty shocked by what felt like a very persistent call to be an Episcopal priest. And at one point, I remember saying to God, I think this is what you want of me. And will you just give me one or two more clues, like make it really obvious? And then if I get that, I won't turn back. Like I'll just do it. And after I kind of had that prayer, I had like a really clear dream. And I was like, okay, this is where my path. So I was ordained at the age of 24, which is the youngest you can be ordained in the Episcopal Church. And really had overall good experiences. Nothing's perfect, but I had really good experiences. I've loved the parishioners of every church I've served at. I did always kind of wrestle with, I remember saying to my bishops, like, I want to serve lower income people. I want to serve people that suffer. And I kept getting called to white affluent churches because that's what the Episcopal Church largely is. But fast forward, I was in a very large affluent church and was very happy there. And then they called a senior rector. And at some point he began not only sexually harassing me, but threatened my job if I went forward. And at this point, I might need to be mindful of how much I share because, I don't want to like trigger a trauma response. It was very traumatic. I had been harassed before in high school, and I didn't know any of this at the time, but it elicited a trauma response. So it was hard for me then and in the months preceding to understand, like to have self-compassion, that a trauma response means like you don't just say, oh, I am being harassed. Let me go forward. Let me be a rational being about it. Oh no, you are freaking out. You are a deer in headlights. There is no reasoning. There's no reasoning. You're afraid. And I was terrified. I remember praying and saying, help me get out of this. Like I'm afraid, because in our hierarchical denomination, if a senior pastor of a large church with a lot of power were to, like, what his threat to me was, if you go forward, I will just say it was consensual. And I believed him. Because in our denomination, it's like the army. I mean, he's a higher person than me. And so I felt that I had no out. I believed that he would be believed. And I felt stuck for a matter of weeks. And I prayed, help me get out of this. I don't understand what to do. I was really afraid. And by the grace of God, he put his threat in an email. And so I immediately printed out the email. I had never been to an attorney before, but I found a woman employment lawyer, took her the email, and I said, is this enough proof? I just want to keep my job and I want this to stop. She's like, yes, yes, this is. This is a federal violation. So I then went to the woman bishop of our diocese, and thus began a canonical process. So here's where I'll pause and say, at that point, I breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, justice is mine. Like I did it. Like I'm here. I got the proof that I needed. I'm going to be held and loved. I'm a part of a denomination that all the time talks about justice, and I feel safe now. Like, plus I had proof. That was what I wanted. And that was not what happened. That was not what happened at all. I will invite the listener to read the book for more details, but I will simply say that in a patriarchal religion, when someone comes forward to say they've been harmed, a woman, rather than like hold the woman with a spirit of compassion and justice and believing her, even when there's proof, what happened was I was like shamed for coming forward. It's like I crossed an invisible line that says, how dare you speak negatively about our institution? And so the events that preceded were every bit as traumatic as the actual harm, the harassment itself. One example I'll share is that they sent me to 3 different psychologists and underwent testing. And of course, the first one said, which it's very clear she's been harassed. I mean, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I was on medication to get through the day. I'd never needed any of that sort of medical support for my mental health before. And then they sent me to a second one. And the second one's like, it's super obvious that you're in active trauma and you've been harassed. I don't even know why they sent you here, but I'll submit the report. And then they flew me to a third one in another region of the country. And at that point, I underwent hours of testing there. And it takes you a while to see. Hindsight is 2020, but I now like looked back, after that and was like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't about my well-being at all. Like this is about self-protection. And if they can possibly find an expert to say, I'm not capable of being a minister, or, oh no, she did. This was not harassment after all. But the third one was appalled that I was there. And she's like, I'm confused. I don't know why you're there. And I shared my story. There's some critical details that I'll leave to the book. And she just lowered her eyes and she was really quiet for a while. And she said, I know what I need to do. Like, you deserve to see some transparency. So you're going to be here while I call the bishop. And so she called the bishop's office, got the canon to the ordinary on the phone, which is the right-hand man, and was basically like, you are actively traumatizing her. I need your commitment now that this will stop, right? So it was tough. It was an incredibly challenging journey to get through to the other side. So I think I'll pause right there because there's been a whole lot more that's happened since then, but I'll pause.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, okay. So I'll summarize what I've heard so far, and thank you for sharing all of this. You had overall a good, whatever that means, right? Supportive upbringing overall. Your relationship with the church was positive, so much so that you felt called to become a priest. There was actually a lot of spirituality, other religions in your circles, and then sort of abruptly, as you rise up in rank or in you kind of like reach a bit more of the inner levels. Like a lay person might not have access to what you have access to. For sure. You get exposed to this sort of darker side, at least as it manifests first with one person and then systemically, as you realize that, in some ways, this isn't just a bad apple, but rather enabled by an entire system that will do anything to call you crazy rather than acknowledge actual inequities that are occurring.
That's exactly right. And I can understand how it might be hard for the listener to say, like, wait, how can what happened afterwards be worse than what happened before? But I was aware that there's always like one bad apple. There's always like, and I thought that at first. I thought, oh, wow, the Episcopal Church is great. And I just happen to have a rector over me that was abusive and had narcissistic characteristics. But no, I started seeing a system. And even then, for years afterwards, I thought, because they put shame on me, I struggled with shame. I didn't speak about what happened to me for years. And then I want to say it was 2023. I was invited to be, so I guess I should fast forward and say, started a church from scratch in a very lower income neighborhood. Remember, I said that was like, it had always been a dream of mine. And I kind of said to the diocese, like, this is what I'm called to do. And I was like, you will not move me. I will not be moved. This is my home. My family is from here. I mean, I don't think they know what to do with me. And I was like, I want to start this lower income church. And I was literally walking the streets of Section 8 housing, mobile home neighborhoods. I was in scrappy neighborhoods that to me were thriving and vibrant with life. And everyone I met felt inspiring. And I felt a kinship with them because they were hard up on life and they needed God to live. And now I knew what that was like. And I just felt like in total solidarity with them. My family's Latino. And so I just like felt in alignment with the lower income Latinos and African Americans I was meeting, and got some grants, even with the Lutherans. I mean, there were two denominations that came around me and this vision and the people that were gathering. And we created the most beautiful, scrappy church in Southside Winston-Salem. And I'm so proud of it to this day. I'm no longer there, but there's about 400 people there now, and just beautiful, beautiful expression of church, a thriving food pantry. But yeah, so I then became, the Episcopal Church asked me to say, they said, hey, if you can do what you said you're going to do, which is start a multicultural bilingual church, we want you to become a coach. So they turned around and said, we're ready to fund your coach training. So I started being a coach and consultant. And then in 2023, I was asked to be at faculty for a women's clergy conference in the Episcopal Church. And they said, we want you to speak to how you have become a successful minister, how you do successfully ministry outside the church. And so I said, do you want me to include my story? Because that is how I got there. And they were like, yeah, we do. So I was shaking. I mean, my little knees were wobbling behind the pulpit, and there was a room full of women, clergy, bishops, all women, all like ready to climb the ranks and very active in their vocational discernment. And I shared my story. And ever since that day, Shalom, women have come forward to me to say, I've been harmed too. I'm so glad you shared your story. And so in our church, we who have been harmed are siloed. There is no desire to cultivate community among the victims, right? And so I started seeing more clearly the way that church is a business, and people will be harmed and cast to the wayside. And it was at that very conference that one of the female clergy said to me, you do know the man that harmed you harmed someone before you, right? And I had no idea. So I just started seeing clearer and clearer, like, oh, interesting that the men that harm and that enable those that harm are rising the ranks. I was watching them rising the ranks. And then meanwhile, I'm in Southside Winston, walking the streets of lower income part of town, feeling alive and like connected to spirit totally, but just like, wait a minute, this is not the church I thought I gave lifelong vows to, right? So, and then since my book came out with my story, I've had more and more women reach out. I've had 30 one-on-one calls with women in my denomination alone, and we're doing cohorts and healing circles now with them. But there's a meaningful part of my book where I talk about like the spiritual expansion that happened to me after that story as well. So I'll stop talking again.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So if I'm hearing correctly, somehow the Episcopal Church invited you as a priest would be the term for you, right? In the denomination to speak in general training, but specifically allowed you to also raise this issue that they have, which do they get credit for allowing that? Some amount? I don't know.
What do you mean?
Like, because they basically said, oh yeah, we'll let you come and publicly share a very damaging story about us to trainees.
Yeah. It's a great question. Well, the conference is just put together by women. I don't even know the details about who sponsors it, but I'm not sure if they knew. I don't know that anyone knew my perspective of the story, because the church kind of controls the narrative of what happens. And so I was a model for how to be successful in ministry outside of church structures. And they wanted me to share how I got there. And I do think the person that asked knew a little bit that I was harmed. And I don't know how much they knew, but yeah.
Right.
So
let me pause and ask you a brief questions, because I come from very different denominations. And so I'd love to get a little bit of context about just Episcopalian. Broadly, what are like the main guiding beliefs within this sect of Christianity? And why is it that they end up being catering to the affluent?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, I'll do my best to answer that. So let's start with their beliefs. In the Episcopal Church, we are one of the mainline progressive denominations, and we have a direct split from the Catholic Church. So we look the most like the Catholic Church of all the denominations that aren't Catholic. We are highly Eucharistically centered, meaning that in virtually every church where there is a priest, you will encounter Holy Eucharist or Holy Communion every Sunday. We have a Book of Common Prayer in common, and the last iteration of that was 1979. So there's been some supplements to come out. It is Anglican, so it is basically the Anglican Church in the United States. And so it is predominantly white. And I think some would say it was the denomination of the most presidents. I guess because of our own colonizing history of the United States, a lot of the people that came over on the East Coast were Anglican. And so our history begins from there. So there's just a lot of old lineage, and there's a lot of Episcopal churches, particularly on the East Coast. But I guess that's somewhat just that the old money and the old lineage that has gone back as old as our country exists.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for that context. And at this point, do you still identify with that denomination?
Oh gosh, what an interesting question. I would say that theologically, I have expanded far beyond it. I find the liturgy in the Book of Common Prayer to be confining to my own faith. You will not find me speaking meanly about it. I think, Shalom, my truth is that some of the colleagues and friends that I most love and admire are Episcopal clergy like me. I work actively with lots of church plants that are doing beautiful things on the ground that embody what I like to call future church, like the church that we aim for in another generation. So I now seek to support that. So what feels faithful to say is, I've got a foot in the church, maybe it's a toe these days, and then the rest of me is in the world. And I'm of the firm belief that the Spirit is moving beautifully in the world, in the secular world, and in other denominations and other spiritualities and other faiths and expressions. And I am chasing after, longing for, seeking the divine's movement in Mother Earth and in people. And so I have less and less interest in situating myself firmly in that denomination or any denomination, mainly because I love just God and the divine so much. And I want to be on an ever expansive journey that takes me far beyond one type. But I also, as I expand, I think it's critical to tell the truth about my experience and what I encountered, and call that church that I have loved to accountability, to say, hey, man, the thing that I say that I believe with every ounce of my body is that future expressions of church cannot include harm. And that churches that are actively harming people and are not facing their shadow side and confronting it will not carry forward into the future. More and more people are saying, that's enough. You know what? I do deserve better, actually. I am worthy, actually. Like, I am going to just pull away and I won't feel bad about it at all. So, I mean, I have less and less patience for churches that are overtly misogynistic, that are overtly harming people behind closed doors, and that when it's named out loud are doing nothing about it. So it's nuanced. I mean, I don't think you hear a lot of anger in my voice, but I do feel very much called to I'm going to keep telling the truth. I'm going to keep saying the hard thing. And every time I open my mouth about this, women privately reach out to me and say, thank you so much. And please keep speaking up. And men too now, actually.
That's amazing. Yeah. To be that beacon where some people to represent that expression or role model, sometimes you're a few years ahead of somebody else, and so you're able to do it, or your character or whatever it might be. But to model that sort of behavior and validation to other people is very valuable and very important for others in that arc. And I guess I'm curious, what has been the response from the official church system that did all this to you as you very publicly go out already in a conference, as we spoke about, but now for more and more, and now you have a book about it, and you're very public about things that do not paint them in a very good light.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you where we're at now. I sought to do this with the highest integrity possible. So what that meant for me was that a couple of weeks before my book came out, I reached out directly to the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church to say, hey, I've got this book coming out, and also I've got this growing number of women that are coming forward, and I am going to be speaking publicly about it. And I do so because I care so much about this church and the future of the church, and the church for the people, right? And so I'm holding out my hand to you and saying, you care about the church and I care about the church. And can we do this together? Can we talk, have a conversation? Here's my book. Here's who it involves. I don't name names in my book, but I'm I want to be honest and forthright and know that I don't hold anger, but I am going to start being really transparent. So I did that, sent the same letter to my bishop. And I would say I got back very appropriate emails that seemed very supportive, actually. And both emails acknowledged that we have a problem. So waited a couple weeks, wrote back and said, hey, can you imagine a scenario where I get permission to sit down and share some of these stories? Thank you for saying that you're working on this on your end with bishops, but if you hear these stories, you're going to know what to work on, right? You don't know these women's experiences, actually. When you're insulated at the top, you have no idea, frankly, right? Guarantee you these bishops aren't volunteering what's happening behind the scenes to the presiding bishop. So at that point, and again, very above board. I feel very proud of the emails I sent. They were rooted in love, compassionate, but just totally into the energy of accompaniment, just nothing. So I reached out to a couple other leaders and got nothing. And I have tried with that spirit of love and accompaniment, even as I keep talking about it, keep making videos, keep hosting healing cohorts and circles, and it's silence, which is
Classic.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you've already admitted you have a problem. What you know you have a problem, and so now silence is okay. I don't get it. I don't understand it, but I also don't understand what it's like to be a church leader that kind of is silent about this level of injustice. So
it's very corporate, right? To acknowledge the thing and then do nothing about it, right? Because then you've kind of walked this middle ground where you've diffused the energy coming your way while doing zero in the process. How would they view you? I mean, you're still ordained with them? I joke that if the organizations that ordained me back in the day they would absolutely revoke it, with my behaviors. To the point, there was one of the organizations, I didn't get ordained through them, but they had a clause in their contract that at any point they could just retroactively declare you not a rabbi. How do they view you? Are they able to unpriest you or whatever that looks like?
I don't know how they view me, to be honest. I mean, there's a couple of bishops that like my social media post, and I've definitely talked to some canons, which are kind of the right-hand men or women of bishops that are thank you, this is a big problem, keep doing it. But there's not been a lot of overt, hey, she's onto something. Let's align in solidarity with the women that are harmed and do this together. She clearly loves the church. There's no F you to her attitude. Let's do the thing, guys. No, that's not happening. So I honestly don't know how they view me. I suspect they could revoke it, but what am I doing that's wrong? Telling you that harming others is, find the Bible verse and find what I'm doing wrong. Actually, where the wrong is that we're not proactive enough in caring for the very people we're harming, and I don't know that we're proactive enough in shifting the system.
Yeah. And so you no longer work in when you were doing that kind of grassroots, kind of down to earth church, were you on their salary at the time? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was a church planter, yes, a church planter in our context is receiving income from the diocese. So the diocese did that. And then I wrote a lot of grants. And so I would get grants from the diocese and then grants from the National Episcopal Church. And then the same thing happened with the North Carolina Lutheran Synod. I got grants and support from the North Carolina Synod and then also from the wider church.
Okay.
Because I'm planting a church for them. And like then, then in our denomination, I walk away from the church and it's their church. Like I don't have any ownership. I don't mingle, right? It's a kind of a clean cut.
So you're no longer on their payroll, essentially.
No, I'm not. I am a coaching consultant. And so I am receiving income from churches, cathedrals, and I actually just completed a contract with the Episcopal Church for some coaching, a very small contract. So I'm now contract based because I do coaching and consulting for forming faith communities, whether that's brand new ones. I love to start up faith communities and then reshaping older churches that are like, okay, we don't want to die. Teach us how to more deeply serve our community, because that's the key to thriving. And then outside of that, though, I am starting some circles and supporting some more spiritual faith communities here in town. And I'm really into the kind of deinstitutionalized expression of following Jesus, like where two or three are gathered. And for that matter, just forming faith communities that are totally deinstitutionalized. And I'm definitely a both and person. Like I think there's plenty of Episcopal churches that are, and other denominations that are just like badass, healthy, serving the community, really great. I have lots of colleagues and friends that are leading those communities. And, in Christianity, it's like 40 million people have walked away from the Christian church in the last 25 years. And so we have this definition of like, oh, well, to be Christian, you have to be a member. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said where two or three are gathered. So I'm kind of on a mission now of like, well, let's expand what it looks like to be a faithful follower of Jesus.
Interesting. So, because I was going to ask you briefly, looking at that kind of old-fashioned-y, and this is probably two questions rolled into one,
Sure.
Starting at the very top, starting at the Bible itself, right? How patriarchal is, I know how patriarchal the Old Testament is, I don't have to ask you, but is there patriarchy already in the New Testament, if you will? And how does that continue to manifest in the systems that you used to be a part of, right? Like what, in all of that, in the what I would consider pretty, the studs or the foundation, the pillars of traditional church allows for the kind of abuse that you actually endured.
Yeah, that's it. No, that's exactly right. As you know, patriarchal Christianity is infused in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible, and certainly in aspects of the New Testament. I am of the belief that Jesus models an integrated Christianity, an integrated faith, I would say. I think he models a deep compassion that I would say is part of the sacred feminine. And there are aspects of the divine feminine in the Bible, like woman wisdom, that we just don't hear as much of. Because, it's like the church, at some point there's a split. It's like the church can choose empire or can choose following the way of Jesus. And empire is going to continue on that route of patriarchal expressions that emphasize control, that emphasize the narrative, that emphasize making you feel guilty and shamed if you're not following them, that are hierarchical. But following Jesus is different. And there's some intersections in the church, but I think it's important to kind of pull back and say, well, what aspects of American Christianity are a reflection of empire? And what is a reflection of like faithfully following Jesus or just being a person of faith? I mean, I would welcome a conversation about this with people that are Jewish that are expanding beyond what they were raised with as well. So I happen to believe that like in our American programmatic Christian system, it's nearly impossible. We don't have it in our structure to teach the follower of Jesus how to pull away and draw near to God in silence in the way that Jesus did. We don't emphasize silence. We emphasize noise in church. We don't emphasize deep compassion for the community because we want to sell the image that you come to church to experience God and that the church ministries are more important than. And so actually, I find that a lot of churches are doing a very they're very anemic when it comes to truly loving their neighbor. Like let's get down and dirty and look at the numbers, the finances that are going to other people, the hours. A lot of it, ministry is defined as ministry in the church. And so I just want to like shine a light on church's business and say, hey, what are some alternative models for following Jesus that get us out of a building entirely, that gets us out of layers of staff and hierarchy, because that's not what Jesus came for.
Right. Isn't it ironic? Because that is like literally Jesus' entire criticism at the time of the Pharisees. They had built this institution and this temple, and he was like, don't do that. And it's almost like it's the human condition. And they're like, in the name of Jesus, let's build a new temple and a new... It's amazing how humans left unchecked will just go right back in the name of the thing that they're saying not to do. I find that highly amusing on some level. A technical question for you. Is it possible in the Episcopalian Church for women to have the exact same rank as men? Like it goes all the way to the top?
It absolutely is. We do have women bishops, and we've had a woman presiding bishop before. So absolutely. There is parity in that regard. And it is also widely acknowledged that we are a patriarchal system. There is evidence that women are getting paid less, that women are elevated less. And then, of course, I am only barely scratching the surface at the ways that women are treated. We're clearly treated as second-class citizens in many ways. So it's a little bit of a both and there.
For sure. Like there's the theoretical openness to it. That's level one. And it is a level because some places like Orthodox Judaism is not even open to it theoretically. And then there's the practicality, right? And the fact, for example, as you alluded to, where the woman might be more inclined to just be out there in the community and getting inspired by the actual work. And then that classic stereotypical narcissistic man is just climbing the ladder of as much power as he can and stepping on whatever heads he can to get there. And that stereotypical divide, which we, again, every individual is an individual, but we see this pattern of this sort of male corporate climbing and the female nurturing dynamic. And it's probably visible pretty obviously. Again, this is my interpretation from the outside. You don't have to agree with everything I said there.
No, I think that's true. And also to be clear, I only know, to be honest with you, and saying in all of my one-on-ones with women that have been harmed in the church, on more than one occasion, they've pointed to a woman bishop that has caused trauma or has made their work beyond difficult. So in some ways, I wonder if in some cases you need to be part of the system in order to climb that ladder, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anybody could be potentially guilty of that if they're within the system or within that empire and they're trying to preserve their own trajectory.
Isn't that the human element? I mean, we're all capable of misusing our power. But it's not as simple as all the women are
great and all the men are.
No,
I appreciate you calling me out on that.
Life is more complicated than that.
For sure. Thank you. So let's shift as we come towards the end of the episode. I would love to hear from you about a bit about your book, a bit about what the advice that you tend to be giving people around healing from this type of trauma. I deal a lot with classic religious trauma. This is not trauma caused by there's two kinds of religious trauma I'm kind of naming now. There's trauma from the teaching of the religion, and there's trauma from the religion's structure, whether that's the authority figure or the systems that almost everybody would acknowledge, hey, this isn't what the religion's about. But we all know that on the day-to-day, that is what the religion is about. And so that kind of divides. So whatever flavor of religious trauma that is, what do you find yourself like teaching? So let's start. What's the name of your book?
Yeah,
right? Yeah, for sure.
It's Following Jesus Beyond Church Walls.
Okay.
You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's called Bookshop. It's lovely if you have your independent bookstore order it. At our independent bookstore in Winston, Bookmarks, they will mail you a signed copy. And so it's available anywhere. And we now have like ebook available on Amazon. And I hope to do audio at some point soon.
Amazing.
For me, the most valuable part of the book is not my story. It's the spiritual journey and the spiritual expansion that happened in my life afterwards. So it's like when everything you know and understand about patriarchal Christianity shatters, right? Like I'd given my life, my vows to the church, and yet I saw with very clear eyes that church was a business, that they did not actually care about me as a person when I had been traumatized and harmed, and that I did not see justice happen in the way that justice should. But it forced me, it's almost like I had surrendered. I had the lens broke open. And so then the new way of understanding the divine that emerged was more mystic and expansive, very much grounded in scripture, grounded in my tradition. But taking me far beyond the confines of church that puts profit ahead of people. And so part one of my book is my story and kind of my journey, where I weave the listener through colonized expressions of church. I mean, this is not new. We've got the slave trade and witch trials and all sorts of examples of how church has harmed people for the sake of numbers and profit. And when we don't face that shadow side, we perpetuate it. That's why harm is still happening, right? But part two is what I love, because it's an invitation to co-create and participate in a more expansive energy of divine love or God that takes us beyond a patriarchal expression. Like, if we can imagine that the patriarchal God that we know is one face of God, but there's a hidden face, because the knowledge of the divine feminine, of the more intuitive and compassionate side, has been hidden from us in our culture. So part two takes the reader through certain aspects of following Jesus beyond church walls, divine rhema, the divine feminine, Christ consciousness, the deep awareness that we can encounter Christ and God anywhere. There's nowhere God is not. You don't need to drive to a church to encounter Christ. You can go into the woods. You can be on your couch and close your eyes and draw near to the God that abides in your heart. And nearly every major religion acknowledges that we can locate divinity within us, that we are inherently of God. And yet it's almost been hidden by programmatic Christianity, by other religions that want you to put your energy up and out into the hierarchy. But Jesus modeled going within and taking your love out into the community.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, go on.
No. Well, I'll say.
As far as timing, do you want to go till the original part was till 10:50? Can you go closer to 11? I know 11 is your cutoff. Do you want to buffer time? We'll try to maximize this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I guess my two things come up to mind. One is that it seems interestingly like I made that distinction between being harmed by the teachings versus being harmed by the people. And a classic apologetic, when I would raise all sorts of criticism against Judaism, a lot of times people try to throw just the people under the bus. They're like, oh, the teachings are good, but people are human, and don't judge religion by its followers is a classic quote that gets thrown around a lot. And it sounds to me a little bit like that's like the teachings always worked for you, and it was the systems that were supposedly delivering it that you can see so many flaws in. And that's maybe something that I don't know if that sounds accurate to you. So you can address that if that is or isn't true. A follow-up question though to me, because just from my stance, isn't it like to say the divine feminine, which I hear a lot and I hang out in those circles. And yet when I look at the Old Testament, New Testament, God is so male, right? Yeah. As Jesus and the Father. And then there's 10 male preachers for every wise woman who occasionally gets mentioned, right? And how do you personally reconcile that?
Yeah, that's great. You're exactly right. I mean, I can't deny that that's accurate, and that the culture of Judaism is very patriarchal, and you can't read the Bible without seeing patriarchy all over it. But there's also aspects that have not been emphasized enough, like ruach, breath, spirit is feminine. That there's aspects of creation and of how creation was breathed into life that inherently integrates the feminine. And I also believe that Mother Mary was downplayed, and Mary Magdalene, that critical women figures in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, that their importance has been downplayed by those that shaped the canons of Holy Scripture. So yes, you're exactly right. And I still find meaning in Scripture. I especially find meaning in the teachings of Jesus. And I also think it's safe and faithful to expand beyond it. I mean, part of like a fundamental religion, which the Episcopal Church is not, but would be to say the word of God is the word of God and you read the Bible and that's it. And that's how you encounter God. That's not true. There was a period in my life where it was very traumatic for me to enter into church. It was so hard after I was harmed as I was getting back on my feet and healing. I was on short-term disability for a reason. I mean, I could not just go back into church, but I could encounter God in the forest. And I could encounter God when I closed my eyes, and I could encounter God like in sacred conversations with friends and loved ones. And so I am a both and person. I love Holy Scripture. It is totally imperfect. Of course, it's inherently patriarchal and sexist, and there are beautiful aspects of it that speak truth to me. And there's so much truth in the world. I mean, the world is scripture to me these days, and Mother Nature is beautiful reflection of God's beauty and grace and abundance. Like nature has so much to teach us. So I guess I do honor scripture and am moved by it. I still actively read it. And I just want to, for the millions of people that can't go back home to the faith that they were a part of, I want to say, hey, no matter where you go, the divine is there, right?
Right.
And sometimes it's as simple as closing our eyes and quieting our brain, quieting the world around us to encounter that spirit of divine love.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious, my sense making was very different, and I'd love to hear like how you've made sense of it, where to create the distinction between the bad thing that happens to you and the God being good. I drew a direct link. If God did everything, then God abused me, right? And how do you make sense for yourself where it's like, okay, this happened there, and I'm going to heal from it and move on, and there's a whole other layer that's actually more expensive, as you've described it, that I can tap back into still.
Yeah, I mean, there's no aspect of me that thinks that God wanted me to be harmed in the way that I did. There's no part of me that believes that. And I guess I have nuance. Like I believe that there's good and holy and beautiful things happening in the church. And I believe it's my call and all of our calls to speak loud as hell when we see things that cause harm to other people, because our God is a creator. God is a creator and God is of love. And so when there are things happening that are destroying spirits and lives and that are not done in a spirit of love, we call it out. We say, hey, this is right. This is the very basics of our faith. So I don't know. I never thought that God wanted, there's no part of me that thought that God wanted that of me. And I think the reason why I'm consistently feeling called to speak up louder and louder about this is because I know that this aspect of church is not of God.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's not of God. And so I'm not going to shut up about it.
So follow-up question for that. What do you feel needs to change within that empire, within the church, within the business of church? Because it is here to stay, right? I don't think it's going anywhere soon. But certainly you could list many things that could vastly improve the situation. And I don't know if that's your main push with your activism, but probably one of them you would love to see change. What would you like to see different?
It's a great question. I have a whole chapter in my book called A Vision of Future Church, and it makes up more than 10% of the book. And I speak a lot about future church. I study statistics, but I've also helped to plant and form faith communities around the country now, both in person and just around the country. And so I do feel very attuned to the question of what should future expressions of faith look like. And of course, a baseline is no harm, period. Right. And so that's partly why I'm so loud at this moment, because this is a really basic thing that we've got to tackle and move on from. I hope that there are all forms of expressions of church, including denominations in the future. I'm not opposed to that at all, but get the harm out of there, right? And take care of your buildings and get out of your buildings and get into your community. Pour your money and your hours into your community and shift your understanding so that what is sacred is in the world every bit as much as in the church. Don't cloister yourself off and think that you're good and holy in your church walls while not paying attention to the beautiful abundance found in people's lives in the world. I write a lot in that chapter about what future church expressions could look like, but I also think it's important that we reclaim the notion that where two or three are gathered is just as good and holy as a church with a building and a membership. Like we need to expand our concept of what constitutes a faith community. And I love the notion of circles that are not hierarchical, that don't require staff, that don't require buildings, that are humble expressions. A handful of people gathering around a bonfire, around a living room. They're going out in their community and they're volunteering together. They're just like being the love of God in the way that suits them. They're singing in retirement homes or teaching kids to read, like whatever. I mean, what does it look like to strip down faith communities, but hold on to the love and the compassion, both for the self and for the neighbor? I mean, isn't that what it's all about? Love your neighbor as
Right.
yourself, right?
I
So
love
there's
that.
more to it in the book, but that's like the basic of it is like, hey, can we expand? Let's just expand, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but like greatly expand our understanding.
For sure. One technical question that I forgot to ask earlier: does the Episcopalian Church, is it like Catholic, where like the priests are not supposed to be in any sort of relationship, definitely no sexuality, or it is more
Very
open?
different. I'm happily married with 3 kids. So I love that about our Episcopal Church. We're also very gay friendly in beautiful ways. There's so much about our church that I love. We stand up for immigrants, and yes, clergy can marry and have children. We have trans clergy. I support trans church planners in my vocation. So yeah, it's actually very justice oriented in ways that I really admire. And so it's important to me that we also look to our shadow side and spread that justice to the women of the church and to those that are being harmed behind closed doors.
So they're doing some things right, and they gotta expand it to other
100%.
places. Last question for you, I think. Tell me briefly about your organization, Water and Light.
Oh, yeah. Water and Light is a network that I co-created with a couple of good friends and colleagues in order to support the growing number of women and people that are coming forward to be harmed. On my website is chantalmckinney.com. It's just my name. And there's a tab called Water and Light. And there's all these links where we're trying to support people that are coming forward. We have a private Facebook group where people have anonymously shared their stories of harm, just so that the average person can understand, like, what is it? I mean, what does this look like? My book obviously showcases a very clear example as well, but I've done healing cohorts where women are gathering monthly and sharing our stories. And that allows us to rebuild trust and affirm and support one another as we heal. I host healing circles twice a month. So there's a petition that anyone can sign to say, like, I'm in solidarity with these women that are being brave enough and coming forward. So it's scaffolding to support the shift that I hope will happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chantal. You're doing really great work. I think we could all agree that if the church, you're not perfect, nobody is, but
Right.
if religion looked more like this and less like the kind of religion that we've all probably experienced, definitely on Beyond Belief and stuff like that, the world would be a very different place. So I hope you're able to continue this good work.
Deeply honored. What a blessing to be in conversation with you, and good job on your work and telling and sharing these lovely stories.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it, and be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.